Russia appears to be turning to 70-year-old tanks. Some folks leave comments that it was some new form of mobile artillery. I doubt it. More on that in a second, but first, let's take a look at how the battlefield in Ukraine has shifted over the last week. So there's two areas I'm going to focus on here. These are the two areas that have seen the bulk of the fighting as of late, Bakhmut and Avdiivka. So Bakhmut has continually been at the top of the news for a few months now. This is a town in eastern Ukraine that saw some intense fighting really all through the winter, even when the intensity sort of died down in other areas at the front. For about 3 months now, Russia has pushed back Ukrainian forces to the east, north, and south of the town, and it doesn't take an expert strategist to see that an encirclement here is on the table. The challenge that Ukraine faces in holding Bakhmut is the limited entry and exit points to the western edge of town that are now under Russian indirect and in some cases direct fire control. That means that anyone and anything coming to Bakhmut has to travel that one route and is at risk of coming under fire at any moment. So you can see how this turns bad pretty quickly, right? Like if your forces are in the city under constant attack and reinforcements take fire on their way in, big picture, that's going to be a hard situation to hold on to for long. Looking at a map update here, and worth noting that anytime you're using these maps, the situation on the ground could be different as I record this or as you watch the video. So think of these as giving a general idea more than a precise location of Ukrainian and Russian positions. Russian progress in Bakhmut over the last week has generally been focused on the southeastern portion of the city, but the lines are largely unchanged to the north and south where the potential encirclement could come from. There have been sporadic reports of Ukrainian counteroffensives in the area of Bakhmut, but it's more accurate to think of those really as like counterattacks. So a counterattack could be carried out by something as small as a squad-sized element, really seizing the local initiative that they see develop in the battlefield in front of them. By contrast, a counteroffensive is much larger in scale and is usually coordinated between multiple units. What we've seen reports of in and around Bakhmut are Ukrainian pushes around the western supply lines, likely focused on keeping those open. Big question around Bakhmut: is it worth it? Can really be asked of either side, but it's something we won't know for sure until long after this battle has been decided, maybe even the war. The Ukrainian argument for holding is largely that the casualty ratio is so skewed, with some reports of 8 Russian soldiers killed for every 1 Ukrainian soldier, that it's worth holding at all costs simply to chew through the attacking forces. There's also an argument that it's become a political symbol and taken on a level of importance beyond a tactical significance to where its loss could serve as a blow to the overall Ukrainian war effort. Finally is the argument that Bakhmut falling would open the door for Russia to push onward to Sloviansk and Kramatorsk, which would threaten all Ukrainian positions in the eastern portion of the country. There's also the exact counter to the earlier comment I had about casualty ratios. Some Russian commentators put the ratio in the other direction, saying that Ukraine is losing significantly more than Russia is around Bakhmut. Finally, there's an argument that Russia keeps feeding the fight at Bakhmut because it's tying down Ukrainian resources that now cannot be used somewhere else. So it's no secret that Ukraine has poured reinforcements into the city over the last few months, and no country has unlimited manpower, so 1 soldier to Bakhmut means 1 less going elsewhere. And it's possible that's consuming resources that Ukraine had set aside for a counteroffensive or limiting their ability to reinforce other areas where Russian advances could be expected. All of that has to fall into the realm of speculation. We just won't know for sure if either side has played their cards right at Bakhmut for some time here. The second area I wanted to look at is Avdiivka. This city is a bit south of Bakhmut and has been on the front since 2014. That generally means that the defensive positions on both sides are rather substantial, and as we've seen in similar areas, any advance there is going to be difficult. Now, Avdiivka got a lot of attention about a week ago. Some Russian Telegram channels started announcing that Russian forces had broken through the Ukrainian lines and that whole city was about to fall and so on and so on. I mean, yes, Russia has made progress, especially to the north and the south of town over the last few months, and the activity there has picked up substantially as of late, but there really aren't any clear indications of a major Russian breakthrough. Just looking at this map, you can see the same risk of envelopment starting to emerge here that we see in Bakhmut. Totally possible that's where this fight leads, and before long we're talking about should Ukraine withdraw to secondary lines or is it worth holding Avdiivka at all costs. But for now, the front in that area at least seems to be rather stabilized. So Avdiivka is worth keeping an eye on. Without knowing force dispositions of the two sides, it's impossible to predict what's going to happen next, but a bulge in the line like this really is never a good thing. All right, now let's talk about those old Russian tanks headed to Ukraine. So over the last week, there have been images and videos coming out showing T-55 and T-54 tanks on rail supposedly headed to Ukraine. Now, as a disclaimer, those could be headed anywhere. I understand that seeing Russian military equipment on a train while they're at war means that it's not crazy to assume that said equipment is headed to that war, but technically they could be moved for any number of reasons. So Russia could be clearing up storage space for something else, moving them to ranges to be used as targets for ATGMs, taking them to another factory to be scrapped for parts, or to port to sell to the many countries around the world that still use or would be interested in purchasing these. Who knows? Just want to lay it out there that this is far from 100% clear that they're actually headed to the battlefields of Ukraine. Now, assuming they are, there's a few ways they could be used, but as modified artillery really isn't one of them. So when this report first came out, I had folks commenting on some posts about how Russia is so low on ammunition and barrels that this was their immediate solution. So there are more and more reports coming out of Russian units complaining about lack of ammunition, and that's not crazy. Even with the stockpiles Russia likely inherited from the Soviet Union, they're chewing through so much that it's going to be a challenge for any nation to immediately shift production to keep up with that demand. Add to that, some percentage of older rounds may not be usable, and it's very realistic that there are, at the very least, ammunition concerns in the Russian military right now. Now, there are historic examples of tanks being used as artillery. Technically, it can be done, but it's incredibly ineffective, and there are 3 reasons to me why it won't be done in Ukraine. First, accuracy. All modern artillery systems, and by modern, I mean starting like 100 years ago, have some sort of firing tables available. These are data points calculated out by weapon type and shell to give you a start point of how to aim the howitzer. So using this old US version for 155 millimeter munitions, you can see that to range a target at 7,000 meters using a Mike 107 HE round and a Mike 577 point detonating fuse, the cannon would need to be at 495.5 mils of elevation. Now, in the artillery world, we use mils rather than degrees just to be that much more precise. So rather than 360 degrees in a circle, we use 6,400 mils. These fancy little charts don't exist for tanks to be used as artillery. So from the first round to the last, you're winging it. An observer might be able to tell the crew that they're off by 200 meters, but there's no set way to make that adjustment back at the tank like there is with a howitzer. But maybe they could, or Russia could learn quick, which is on to my next point. Each firing solution would be unique. The T-55 elevates only to around 18 degrees, so back to artillery talk, that's like 320 mils. Now I'm comparing a 155 millimeter howitzer chart to a 100 millimeter smoothbore tank, so it's not exactly perfect, but you can see how the howitzer needs to have more elevation than the tank possesses if they want to hit any targets beyond 5,000 meters. And 5,000 meters sounds like a long way, but it's not much on the modern battlefield. That's bordering on direct fire range for most modern tanks and anti-tank guided missiles. So to get that extended range, you need elevation. And how we've seen this historically done is by driving the tank up a mound. Simple. Done, right? No. That will let the tank sling around or two a bit further, but nobody knows where it's going to land. I mean, look back at our firing table real quick. To range a target at 7,000 meters, the main gun would need to be at 495.5 mils of elevation, or roughly 30 degrees. But if that dirt isn't perfectly settled, or they're just off by 3 degrees, they're going to be 500 meters short of their target. 3 degrees and that round has 0 impact on enemy forces. Move that up to 6 degrees off, and that round is landing a full kilometer away from your target. They might not even know they're under fire. With artillery, you can check your aim point after each round, make minor adjustments, and have very little variation from one round to the next. With tanks, hanging off a berm, it's a total crapshoot from one round to the next, but that's what you need here. Multiple rounds to even come close, which gets to the final point. On a battlefield filled with drones and fire-finding radar systems, the last thing either side wants here is to give away their position and pray they can dial in the impacts before they're targeted themselves. First round fire for effect is the goal. That means you have the correct targeting data and the crew puts the very first round exactly where it's needed. Maximum impact, least amount of time exposing your position. A tank is the opposite of that. A tank trying to hit a target with indirect fire 6 kilometers away is just waving a big flag to drones and counter battery systems that can actually hit a target 1 or 2 rounds into a fire mission. Now the counter to that is they can fire and move, right? They're a tank, they're mobile. Yeah, but if a tank fires 1 round on a berm, then relocates, every single round is being sent on a wing and a prayer of coming anywhere near their intended target. All right, so what might these old Russian tanks actually be used for in Ukraine? All signs on my end point towards fixed fighting positions along a defensive line. Since late last fall, Russia has spent a lot of energy building up their defensive lines all across Ukraine. You've probably seen some of these anti-tank obstacles and ditches showing up on social media. Regularly, they get laughed at and by themselves, they're not too intimidating. However, an effective defensive position would have all of these lines under some sort of overwatch. That would include intersecting fields of fire for small arms, and at times, larger caliber weapon systems able to take on any armored vehicles testing the lines. Now, I've talked about it before, but tanks are offensive weapons. They're most effective in their role when they can be on the move. A stationary tank is just a tempting target for a drone and artillery. However, these defensive lines need overwatch from anti-tank systems in order to be even the least bit effective. In some of the images here, you can see vehicle ditches dug where larger weapon systems like tanks or BMPs are integrated into the Russian defense. Now, tanks and BMPs have and will continue to play a major role in any sort of offensive action by Russia. So I can see a scenario where these older T-55s are moved into static positions watching the line, freeing up newer tanks and APCs to be used for any sort of offensive action. I mean, given the option, you'd rather have new tanks spearheading an attack and old tanks set back behind berms providing fire support. In that sense, think of these T-54s and T-55s less as tanks and more as like self-propelled anti-tank guns. As old as they might be, that can and still can do some work. I'll wrap it up by saying again, it's far from confirmed that T-55s will ever set track in Ukraine, but if they are, expect them to be dug in to defensive positions all across the line. But that's all I got for now. We'll see y'all next time.